Thanks everybody for joining us here. We're going to have a good panel discussion that I think is going to follow very well and expand on some of the points that Victor was just talking about. So joining us here on the panel, we have Erin Gill, who's the Sustainability Director for the City of Knoxville, and also, I should say, a former colleague of mine when I worked at the city. Amber Weaver, who is basically Erin's counterpart, I guess, in the city of Asheville, North Carolina, which has also been doing a lot of exciting work in sustainability. And Dr. Stephen Smith, who is the director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and he has been involved for 30 years in various ways, working on energy efficiency, and is really a leading voice for clean energy issues in the Southeast. So welcome to all of you. Do we have all of our panelists here? I'm just making sure that everybody is checked in. I guess let's get to it. We have a lot to talk about in a relatively short time. I think the first thing to talk about is when, we're talking about sustainable cities, and I'd like you all to talk a little bit about why we're talking about cities. Obviously, climate change is a global phenomenon. Even the largest cities in the world make up only a small part of its footprint. And never mind medium-sized cities like Knoxville and Asheville. So, why and how are cities important in providing leadership on sustainability? And what are some of the concrete policy approaches that Amber and Erin, you're taking in your cities, and Stephen, that you are seeing across the region and kind of advocating for? And let's start with Erin here in Knoxville.
Great, thank you, Jesse. It's really good to see you and good to see so many colleagues and friends on this call. I'll kind of start with the first part of your question, and that's really the frame setting around why cities matter. They do represent landmass wise a relatively small portion of our globe, but the reality is that cities consume 2/3 of the world's energy, and we are 70% of the global CO2 emissions. So when you think about where impacts are coming from, they really are rooted in cities. Globally and regionally as well, cities are also on the front lines of climate change. So we're both at the heart of the problem, but we are also, I think, at the heart of the innovation where solutions can take root. So, while, we play a big role, and while I think it is incumbent that we are just one part of the solution and that federal leadership has to be there as well, as we've heard from folks earlier in this presentation, as well as earlier in the day, there's a lot of policy solutions that we are at the front lines of implementing, whether that's building codes or whether it's how we design our streets, that the decisions that we're making, from land use decisions all the way up to parking pricing, we are in a position to where we can nudge and also change systems so that we're able to, both in the big picture and the small picture, start to shift our global emissions patterns if we're all working together, which I think increasingly cities are. We're networked, we learn from one another, and we are, and across the globe, really leaning into saying, if not us, who? And so that's been really exciting to be part of that work.
Amber, your thoughts from Asheville?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Erin, for opening up the panel questions for us. I think it's really important, your points and highlights on how cities contribute. I also think here in Asheville, one of the important things that I feel pretty adamant about in thinking about how we want to address climate change as a community is removing barriers. And I think as a city government, I think it's really important to, one, be partnering on multiple levels with our community members. And in order to do that, I think the participation and the hard work that gets done is also to identify and highlight barriers that we as cities need to be working on changing to allow us to allow communities to address climate change and climate concerns. In Asheville, we not only look at our internal operations, but we're also thinking community-wide and how we partner with our community members, whether it's our utility or the Citizens Climate Lobby or local students and universities. I think all of us bring a great mixture of ideas that we want to address when thinking about how we want to move climate change forward. And again, I think cities continue to need to hear from others as well. We're not the end all be all. And I think it's really important that we hear from our community members on ideas on how we can address the climate issues together. And I think I really rely on our community to, let us know where government is in the way and how we want to address also our BIPOC and frontline community members. Also something that's really important to us here in Asheville. And if we're all working together in this movement and moving us forward, I think the cities need to be able to participate and think on how we want to make policy to make the changes and how we move those goals forward. They're larger goals, and I think we as communities have to work on it together. And I also think when we're working together, we are heard at a much higher state level as well. And I think that there's a chain of both micro and macro works that need to be happening in order to address climate change.
And Stephen, because you do work across the region in the Southeast, I guess, could you talk a little bit about the leadership that you think is important at the city level, and what are you seeing out there? Like, how would you grade our cities in the region here on providing that leadership?
Well, thank you, Jesse, and thanks for being a part of this important conference. So I think the first thing to say is that cities have really stepped into the void because we have had such a high level of federal dysfunction on this issue and lack of leadership at the federal level, that the cities have really had to step into the void and really provide that leadership. Even in the Southeast, we have a rare example, say in North Carolina, where you have some real state leadership, but by and large, across the Southeastern states, we're not having state leadership on these issues. So again, cities have stepped into that void. Don, if you could pop up just the first slide, I would show, I'm gonna try to share the screen here for just a second, but we're seeing across the region that there are a number of, you can see the cities here, and this is just a small sample. There's close to 100 cities across the Southeast that have taken various levels of action, setting either goals for their city operations or for community-wide, and we'll get into that more as we talk. But this just gives you a sampling, and obviously Asheville and Knoxville are in leadership positions on this, and we'll delve into those more. But the cities have really become, and I think as Erin indicated, it's where the action is in the sense of both the emissions, it's also where the population is. It's really where the rubber meets the road, because you can legislate at the federal level, but at some point you've got to really implement at the local level. All politics is local to some degree, and so that's really where it happens. And they are laboratories of innovation. We do have concerns that, we have lots of aspirational goals, as you can see here on this slide, but actually getting from the aspiration to the actual concrete elements, that still is very much a work in progress. And we've got to really engage these things. I think there's leadership from a number of cities of working with the communities as we articulated. And finally, I would say that unfortunately, the COVID crisis has really hit a lot of cities hard on the financial impacts of this. And so I think we're going to have to really work very hard. There's a large discussion about how we're going to replenish some of the resources that have been lost, because a number of these changes are going to take resources. So we're going to have to pay particularly close attention to that. But I think that cities are where the action is right now. Hopefully we'll have federal leadership. Hopefully we'll have more state leadership, but the cities have really stepped into the void.
Well, so to follow up a little bit, especially on the kind of community goals here, because right, lots of cities, including Knoxville and Asheville, have set ambitious emission reductions targets and have been, you know, impressive at achieving those at the sort of municipal operations level. But obviously, the bigger challenge is how you take that community wide to the things that cities can't directly control. And so maybe, Amber, you were talking about working, bringing the community along. Could you expand on that a little bit? What does that look like in Asheville, kind of that, the broader advocacy work that you have to do?
Absolutely. The city of Asheville and Buncombe County, which is where the city resides, as well as our utility, Duke Energy Progress, which is an investor-owned utility, have created policies around working together to help fulfill our goals around clean, renewable energy. And it started a couple years ago when Duke shut down its coal plant and wanted to shut down its coal plant and create a natural gas plant. And I think our community really spoke out, came together and spoke out against it and wanted to see action of how what can the city be doing, and how can we come together as a collective to be addressing emissions and climate change. And through that, we were able to, as a community, with the work of a lot of volunteers, nonprofits, the government, and the utility, to prevent a peaker unit from being built. And through this opportunity, we were also able to work with a cohort that is the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, in which Erin Gill is also a part of. And we were able to receive funding to visit Knoxville and hear more about their work with TVA in their weatherization program. So we came together not just to address the peaker unit that they wanted to build, and we were able to prevent that from happening, but also bring in other resources so we can work as a community to address energy efficiency for our local residents. And that whole process was called the Energy Innovation Task Force. And now it is the Blue Horizons Project, which you're more than welcome to look up on Google. It's bluehorizonsproject.com, and it highlights all of our utilities' energy efficiency programs, coupled with our grant funding from the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network to work on weatherization to help lower energy costs and bring education to our community on what energy efficiency means. And not only that, but what our renewable energy goals mean. Because there are a lot of people who are working day to day, just trying to make ends meet, especially, you know, we're seeing that highlighted right now with the coronavirus. And we continue to try to speak to community members on why it's important to them, and really making connections. Like Asheville experiences flooding. We're experiencing our most vulnerable populations have a higher negative impact from the coronavirus. Now is the time to be connecting the dots and saying, these are the effects of climate change, and here is how we want to be addressing it. But I think I was going down a rabbit hole there. There's so much to say on this topic, but backing up to our utility partnership through the Energy Innovation Task Force. Again, as I was saying, it's now the Blue Horizons Project. And what I'm most pleased about is this partnership has been going on for about 3-4 years now. And now what we have done, we went out, we posted an RFP, asked nonprofits who could help us with our community goals. And we have the Green Built Alliance. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that organization here in Asheville, won the RFP and is the one that's going to be helping our community members implement the 100% community-wide renewable energy goal. Why is that important? It's important because, again, as we've been saying and what we're hearing from everyone is, yes, cities contribute and can really help, again, especially around policy and helping to take down barriers to make sure that others can have energy efficiency, have renewable energy, working with our utility on community solar, which is extremely difficult here in North Carolina, but also to have somebody rooted in the community that the community trusts is really important. And I would also say that there's so many facets to community emissions. It's your airport, it's your buildings, it's transportation, it is businesses, it's your landfill if you have one. There's multiple entities that need to be coming together. And I think having a third party nonprofit really set the stage has been extremely helpful. And I hope, my hope is that our community trusts the nonprofit that's helping us get this work done on a community-wide scale. So I'll pause because I could probably rattle on some more, but I won't do that. So allow our other speakers to contribute.
No, that's great. Lots of stuff happening there. So Erin, that kind of tees it up for you. Amber mentioned some of the work going on here in Knoxville. Can you kind of talk about taking that conversation to the community level and having the impact at sort of the, you know, individual, household, business level?
Yeah. So I do want to kind of back up a little bit because I think, you know, there's the what I call the big picture macro scale of like, what do we need to be working on together? How do we approach it? And then there's the implementation. And I think in both of those stages, you have to have really good engagement with the leaders in your community who will help you get there, as well as with the residents who are going to be directly impacted by whatever decisions are made. So Mayor Kincannon earlier today mentioned the Mayor's Climate Council. And I think, you know, this is a point that was brought up, which is that, you know, setting the ambitious goals is the easy part of this whole conversation. It's really finding the strategies, the resources, and especially I think in the Southeast, oftentimes the political support to actually achieve those goals that's quite a bit more difficult. So when we structured the Mayor's Climate Council, and I'll give a shout out here to my colleague, Brian Blackman in the Sustainability Office, who's really been heading this effort up and wrangling these dozens of perspectives, but we include not just the technical experts and those among us who are involved in the advocacy and really championing climate issues, but we also want to include leaders of our fellow institutional partners. So groups like University of Tennessee, for example, huge footprint in Knoxville, both in terms of the community as well as the size, as well as the business community. So we know that if we're going to be successful in making decisions that can be appropriate for our local context and have the most opportunity for co-benefits, not just around climate, but also in our broader goals around environment, economy, and quality of life, we're going to need the input and insights from those cross-sector leaders. So that being said, you know, that's our planning effort right now with Mayor Kincannon. But when we think about how we get things done, I go back to that example that Amber referenced around weatherization and low income energy efficiency, and how do you avoid perhaps new generation resources that you can otherwise achieve through conservation. There, it's not only learning from other cities, but it's really in understanding the needs of our residents and how can we create solutions, co-create solutions with members of our community so that they not only understand how they play a role in implementing, but also directly see the benefits and in a positive way that impacts their life here and now. So we're thinking not just about future generations and the global problem, but we're also thinking about the local context and the local impact that we as cities can have on the residents who we serve each and every day. So I think those inputs along the way really just help us get to all the more pragmatic and successful solutions, while at the same time creating a more global awareness of the issues and the different ways that these projects can be win-win-wins. So that whether you're coming to the table as an environmentalist, or you're coming to the table, to use one of Victor's examples, as a parent who is really concerned about the speed of traffic in front of your house, that when we find these solutions, that we actually see that they are embraced by the community, regardless of what perspectives those community members might be coming to the table with.
Great. Well, then, Stephen, there's already been some talk here about the importance of working with utilities in pursuing these local sustainability goals. And that's obviously an area that you and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy have done a lot of work in. My sense is that those conversations about sustainability are maybe easier to have with utilities now than they were 15 or 20 years ago. But can you talk a little bit about their role in all of this, and kind of, is that conversation translating into action?
Well, there is, and this is a slide that I think is relevant to this particular question. On the left, you can see where the electric power sector, this is for the Southeast utilities, and this is a report that the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we do an annual report on utilities carbon emissions, and this report will be, this year's report will be coming out this week. But you can actually see that the electric power sector on the left has been coming down and has actually now been surpassed by the transportation sector as far as carbon emissions and basically climate forcing gases that are really driving climate disruption. But I'll draw your attention to the one on the right, because what we've seen is with a number of our large investor-owned utilities and a number of the large public power entities like the Tennessee Valley Authority, you've seen a significant reduction over the last 8 to 10 years. But one of the things that the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy does is engage with these utilities in the regulatory process where they are doing long-range utility planning. It's called integrated resource planning, and it's basically what they're setting up for over the next 10 to 20 years, because a lot of their utility investments are multi-billion-dollar investments that actually have a very long both planning period, and then they have a long life. And what we're seeing, having gone through the most recent round of integrated resource planning with a lot of these utilities, is that rhetorically, they are actually saying that they're committed to long-range climate goals, but you see their actual emission profile plateauing out based on the decisions that they're likely to be making over the next 10 to 20 years. This is in their most recent planning documents. Obviously, this can change if new policies kick in and bite and force them to drop down to what we need, like either the orange bar or the green bar, which takes us down towards a low to no carbon future. But I do want to just say that rhetorically, you have Southern Company, you have Duke, you have even the Tennessee Valley Authority and others sort of talking about these goals in the future, but yet in their actual decisions that they're planning for right now, you're still seeing them being heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and this is causing a plateau of reductions. But to your basic question, and this gets back to cities, is most of these utilities have a relationship either in the form of there's a municipal utility, like in the TVA region, you have a bunch of munis that actually get power from TVA, or the large investor-owned utilities have relationships with the local. What we're seeing in the industry writ large is that much of the important planning decisions that are actually going to be most dramatically impactful on climate change are moving from these central station power plants, the big coal plants, gas plants, nuclear plants, and is shifting down to the distribution network, which is really where your munis take place, your local power companies. And you can sort of understand that in the sense that you have a lot more distributed generation in the form of solar that is more widely distributed, and other renewables that are coming down to the local level. You have a vast explosion, honestly, in energy efficiency technologies, the Internet of Things, where you can do a lot more controls of, say, programmable thermostats, control those thermostats and other things like that. Again, that moves down to the distribution level. You're seeing things like the electrification of everything, which is happening in the form of electric vehicles. So electric vehicles, storage, and then, you know, innovative things that are beginning now to set up where you can actually have vehicle to grid interactions, where your electric car is actually interacting with the grid. All these technologies are moving down to your local power companies. So the local power companies, the utilities at the municipal level, are becoming much, much more important in the overall equation of the decision making. And so I think that brings it closer to people to be able to interact with their local power companies. And a number of us have been very engaged in a number of cities across the Southeast working with munis on these goals. And it opens up the possibility to take advantage of some of these newer innovations that are actually going to be at the forefront of reducing our carbon footprint. So I think it's premature to say that those discussions are getting a whole lot easier, because there still is some resistance to change, because a lot of the folks in these local power companies, they're kind of engineers, they kind of focused on reliability and the things that they're most used to doing. But we are seeing changes moving in that direction. I don't know that they're as aggressive as they need to be, but I think that we've got to focus and really get more engagement at that level. So we are cautiously optimistic, and I think that there's a lot of potential, because you're seeing, again, a plethora of technology explosions that are actually making themselves readily available at the local level. And I think that gives us more tools for local governments to actually solve the climate crisis.
Great. Well, and I think Erin maybe has something to add on this front.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think your point around opening up new pathways at the local level is so key here, because I think what I've been really excited to see in the Southeast, and specifically, I mean, obviously our territory here in Knoxville is within the TVA Valley with our local utility of KUB, so that's really the lens that I work with most closely. But one of the things that I've been really excited is that these big utilities are, well, at least in TVA's case, opening up pathways by which those local distributors can really take local action and move the needle farther and faster than just what I'd call the grid as a whole. Those of you, and I'll take a minute to humble brag a little bit on a Knoxville success story, but those of you in kind of this space of climate may have seen a recent announcement from Charlotte, North Carolina, making a massive energy purchase. And these are the types of what we're calling large scale purchases that a lot of cities and municipal utilities are taking on to accelerate the decarbonization of the electricity grid. So Charlotte got a lot of really good press. We are so excited. Our city network that Amber and I are part of has really been looking to these macro purchases. They purchased 35 megawatts of solar. So if I can take a minute to humble brag on KUB, they recently signed a 20-year contract with TVA to purchase 212 megawatts of solar. So when we think about the cost of solar coming so far dramatically down, we think about those big utilities already pushing the grid as a whole toward a lower carbon future. And Steve, to your point, you know, there's a question, I think, on what trajectory they stay on as we move toward 2050, but there's pathways that have become available both through those utilities as well as independently at the city scale for these municipal utilities to even take the ball farther and faster through voluntary purchases that they determine are the best options for their customers that they're serving at that distributed scale. So that flexibility and that innovation that's taking place at that city level, I think is really exciting, because we're starting to, I think, hopefully move that trajectory and ensure that we're staying on what I'd call those more aggressive trajectories toward 2040 and 2050 that you showed earlier, Dr. Smith.
Great. And so Amber, I'll give you sort of a two for one. I'd like to hear about your experiences working with utilities there in Asheville and how those relationships. I have a question from one of our viewers wanting to know how you establish those relationships and how you kind of build them, which is probably easier some places than others. And then also, as we talk about these big institutional actors, another major concern for sustainability is equity, and how both the costs and benefits here are shared across the community, and being sensitive to that. So I guess if you could kind of talk about your utility work in Asheville, but then also how you build equity concerns into all of those conversations.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm actually from Georgia and lived there for 20 years and have lived in North Carolina for 5. So those relationships with our utility are definitely from our elected officials, and they were fostered really on that political elected official level here in Asheville. Now, I would also say that, of course, you know, our community is just very aware and sensitive around environmental issues, and, you know, push their elected officials to be making these relationships. What I can also say about that is where we are as a team, our office is rather small. So we have to be thinking, and, you know, again, the goals are very large and ambitious. So how is it we can address them and be successful? And I, again, really depend and lean into our other cities in North Carolina. So Erin mentioned Charlotte, and there's others with other groups in Raleigh, our counterparts rather, in Raleigh and other cities where we have come together through another grant, the Environmental Defense Fund. It's a cities initiative where we came together and listed our top 12 items that we just need so much help with. And through that partnership, and we've also been able to open up and foster an even better relationship with our utility to help them better understand some of the opportunities and pathways that they're opening up for cities, and what is working and what is not working. So, for example, the opportunity that Charlotte was able to utilize to help bring a large solar PPA for them to receive benefits on. We here in Asheville and Buncombe County also attempted to do that, and we were unable to do it, mainly because we live in a mountainous region and we were unable to offer up enough megawatts that made it desirable for people to come to the table, for solar companies to come to the table and work with us. I mention that because through these other opportunities where we're fostering relationships and working at a statewide level, a regional level with the utility, we're able to say, hey, that didn't work for us. And what is it we want to do to make it better and to make it something that all of us can, not all of us, excuse me, but smaller cities, maybe someone like in Asheville who is we're landlocked by mountains, and so we don't have the same opportunities as you know, the east coast of North Carolina, for example. So how do we do that as a team? Secondly, to address the equity question that you asked, I think there are many of us in the sustainability realm that just make sure that we are continue to speak up on behalf of our BIPOC community members, and saying that no matter what program is recommended at a state level with our Utilities Commission or through our utility, Duke Energy, we're constantly saying, okay, but if we go this route, what are the potential unexpected negative consequences to our BIPOC communities? And how can we make sure that whatever we're offering works for our BIPOC community members? And I think if we start there and we're focused on uplifting those that are most energy burdened and most vulnerable to climate change, then we're making successful programs for everyone. And I think what we see in our country right now is a divide of the haves and the have-nots. And I think in order to continue to make climate change relevant and renewable energy relevant, we need to be focusing on how we're moving everyone forward. So I think, you know, when thinking about transportation, when thinking about energy efficiency, electric vehicles, all these opportunities, we need to think about programs and address programs, thinking of our most vulnerable populations, and if we can make them successful in having access to these programs and the opportunities that we're trying to create, then it's an opportunity and a win for everyone.
Well, and Stephen, I know SACE, as it has advocated for its various energy and climate goals, has also always been very attuned to sort of social equity issues. And there was a recent push here for some governance changes to the Knoxville Utilities Board, which you all engaged in sync with some other local social justice organizations. So can you just talk a little bit from your point of view about the intersection of kind of the environmental concerns and the sort of socioeconomic issues?
Absolutely. It's critically important. The frontline communities and a number of folks that are experiencing the ravages of climate change throughout our region and throughout the country and the world are, you know, need a stronger voice and need an opportunity. And so it's critically important. So the first thing, you know, we've always found is, first and most, you've got to engage and listen and bring folks into the conversation who haven't normally been in the conversation. And so we've been doing a lot of that outreach and work across the Southeast. In Knoxville, your reference was the Knoxville Utility Board does not have, we think, the kind of representation that's necessary to really make sure that those voices are being heard in some of their decision making, and that has been manifest in some of their decisions about rate structure, what we call regressive fixed fees and other things like that. And so we were able to help elevate that, and through a campaign using a little bit of what we sort of called John Lewis good trouble, we stirred the pot a little bit and got some movement in a positive direction. We'll see. Some of those things are still playing out. We'll see. You know, talk is cheap, so we'll look forward to see the changes as they move forward, but we're cautiously optimistic about that. And what we found in our work with the equity and inclusion, issues is you've got to make it real and have people see the sort of tangible benefits about climate change. So there's this concept of energy burdens, where there's a lot of folks that are paying a disproportionate amount of their personal income out on utility services. And the way to get at that energy burden issue actually is very fundamentally a way to assist in addressing climate change, because you can help people save money through energy efficiency investments, whether it be weatherization or other opportunities to increase both the comfort and the efficiency of their home, which then saves people money. It also then helps in healthcare costs, because there's a lot of co-benefits that come out of that. And then if you actually work with the community about getting some of the people that are coming in and doing those retrofits and training them, you can start to get these sort of multi-faceted benefits with employment and other things like that. So that's been very popular. We're doing a lot of work in Memphis right now, working with folks. There's a lot of, some of the highest energy burdens are there. We're seeing it in other southeastern cities. The other thing is there's a lot of misinformation about some of these climate solutions. I know there's a lot of people that say, well, hey, folks in the low income community don't really get why we need electric vehicles. Well, the actual, electrifying the bus system, electrifying school buses, there's health benefits associated with that, because you're not breathing the diesel fumes that are associated with these vehicles. And a lot of these folks live right up on the streets, and they have these vehicles and other things going right through their neighborhood. So there's benefits associated there. saves the city money in the long run because you don't have the maintenance and fuel costs. And as we begin to get a larger penetration of electric vehicles, one of the real challenges for a lot of folks that are struggling financially is they have older cars that are either inefficient or they're constantly breaking down or whatever. The beauty of electric vehicles is, first of all, you're immediately going to save money on fuel because the cost of charging the car is significantly less than actually fueling it up with fossil fuels. But a lot of people don't understand this. There's virtually no maintenance to electric vehicles. Other than wiper blades and tires, you just don't have to do any maintenance on an electric car, and they're so much more reliable. And so as we get more and more of these vehicles in circulation and get them to where they develop secondary markets and everything, it's going to be very helpful for folks to be able to use transportation electrification in whether it be mass transit or in individual vehicles to really help them get over some of the challenges of mobility that really have been holding people back in some ways in some of these communities. So critically important, listening to people and then helping people see that these climate solutions actually help them in a lot of other challenges that they have in their lives. And that is all through education and making sure that folks are involved in the conversation. And so we're seeing more and more of that in various cities where I think you have a lot more focus on bringing more voices into the conversation.
Great. Well, we are almost out of time. A lot of questions we weren't able to get to because there's so much to talk about. Erin, I'd like to ask you to kind of talk a little bit about how these equity concerns inform your work here in Knoxville, and then starting with you and kind of going back through the panel. What is your number one or one of your major goals for the next 12 months? Like what is that concrete thing that you are really working on right now?
12 months? We got to think 12 years. So I mean, I think this equity piece to me, it's so much around shifting that conversation. It's not, it is always, how do we get to low emissions, but it's also, how do we solve problems? So when we think about transportation, I like this idea, and Amber and Steve have both alluded to it, but thinking in terms of mobility services. And so really trying to think, how do we move people through our city? How do we help folks who may have been mobility constrained mobility while also allowing them to benefit from lower carbon transportation choices so that they're not feeling so burdened by the financial realities of owning an internal combustion engine, for example, if that's that thing. But at the end of the day, like there are single moms who have to get 2 kids to school and daycare and also make it to work on time. And in our current system, unfortunately, the bus is not always the optimal solution for her. So we have to think about a multitude of different solutions, create multiple mobility pathways. And by rooting that conversation in how do we solve these challenges for real people? How do we make their lives better? And how to I think both all of us, but especially Amber and Steve have made this point. How do we listen and understand first the lived experiences of these communities? And how do we root our solutions in the challenges that our residents are facing? So I think that's really important. In terms of our 12-month plan, there's kind of, I mentioned earlier, and the mayor's mentioned the Mayor's Climate Council, and really trying to complete a big picture thinking around planning and where we go in our next budget cycle. But when I think about transportation, especially, that's where I get excited. We have a new transit director coming in. We are expecting to embark on a 5-year transit plan that I think could be very bold and ambitious, and thinking about how we really shift our bus system to be really where it needs to be in 2020. And then with that, electric buses are coming. We have opportunities to electrify our bus system as well as city fleet. So there's so many opportunities that we're ready to grab hold of, and really still in that listening phase and that planning stage. But I think if you were to talk with the mayor or Brian or I or any of our department directors, we all see opportunities in the city and in our community to make really meaningful progress in ways that can impact everyone's day-to-day lives in a positive way as well.
Great. Amber, major goal for the next year or two?
Yeah. So the way I think about and how we make decisions in our office is, thinking about mitigation and resiliency. And so one of the things that we have committed to doing this fiscal year is better understanding and hearing from our frontline community members on what does climate equity mean to them, and again, what are the barriers that the local government can help to ensure that we're uplifting our frontline community members and making them more resilient in the face of climate change. And in the long run, hoping to really hear from them and get a screening tool, if you will. Asheville is rich with plans. We have an abundance of plans. And I think these plans really were created around our community members that actually have the time to come and participate. And I think we're missing the voice of our frontline community members. So I'm hoping that we will be creating a screening tool. So when we go to implement plans, we're really thinking about, again, our BIPOC community and how we're going to uplift them. And again, you know, underscoring the fact of if they're being uplifted and we're making them more resilient, then collectively we're going to have a much more resilient community when thinking about climate change. Secondly, our office has gone out to work on aggregated solar. And so we partnered with the county, and we are working on 7-megawatt projects to bring in renewables for Buncombe County to be working on our renewable energy goals. And I am excited to say that that is happening, and we're going to be doing a second iteration of RFPs for aggregated solar. So we're continuing to also address the resiliency piece there. And finally, I think we will, over these next couple of years, we'll continue to be working with our utility and making sure that they understand the barriers that we're facing, and making sure we foster those relationships and working with the state level and working with the Utilities Commission to let them know what is working and what is not working from our utility side, in order to really change and work on mitigating greenhouse gases. And so much more, but I will.
Right. I know it's hard to summarize because all of you are doing so many things. Stephen, what's one, SACE always has a lot of irons in the fire. What's something that you're really focused on right now?
Well, quite honestly, the most dominant thing is we've got to make sure that people vote, because that's just absolutely critical. That is probably the most important thing that people can do in the coming, because there's just so much wrapped up in the decisions that will flow from the outcome of the upcoming election cycle. But we continue to track very carefully what the utilities are saying and then what they're actually doing, because sometimes there's quite a delta between those two things. And so we really like to point out where people are consistent and sort of the rhetorical versus the actual facts on the ground. And I would say the other thing that's really important to us that is a real high priority is this concept of electrifying everything. Obviously, the transportation sector is a critical piece of that. I think people are grossly underestimating how fast this change is going to come. And we need to be planning appropriately for it, and which is a great opportunity. But when you start to electrify everything and you begin, not only just in transportation, but in, all forms of anything that's using fossil fuel, as we move away from that, that creates the opportunity to actually get us to those long-term goals, because it is only through electrifying everything and then decarbonizing the grid that you actually get to where we need to be. So there's a much more robust conversation that needs to be had about efficiently electrifying everything. And I think the transportation sector is going to be a really critical piece of this. And that's going to be a lot of our focus in the near term.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Great conversation and a lot of interesting stuff going on. So thanks everybody for hanging with us. And now I guess it's time for lunch, and the next session will start at 12:45.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.